The manual on definition, classification, and systems of supports is critical to the understanding of the legal profession about the needs and challenges of people with intellectual disability. Lawyers are the key to assuring that the voice of their client who has intellectual disability is heard in courts by judges, by juries, and by other participants. The understanding of intellectual disability is critical both in civil cases and in criminal cases. So in civil cases, such as a guardianship case or a case about the admission or periodic review of an individual to a program, or estate planning, where the individual with intellectual disability wants to plan how his or her assets are distributed, or even in healthcare and end-of-life decision-making, an understanding of the client, the legal client's intellectual disability is critical. Other types of cases, of course, would include discrimination cases, human rights cases, and criminal cases where the individual with an intellectual disability might be a defendant accused of a crime or might be a victim who has allegedly been victimized, either because of the disability or the disability interacts with the victimization in some way. So really excellent representation by a lawyer of a client with an intellectual disability would require that the lawyer understand the three components of the definition of intellectual disability, and I would say especially the 5 assumptions that are essential to the application of the definition of intellectual disability. This will assure that the lawyer pays attention to important aspects such as the significantly sub-average intellectual functioning or the limitations in adaptive behavior. And also the proper use of the definition, I think, will help the lawyer avoid incorrect stereotypes and prejudices that might undermine the representation of this client. One of the challenges for a lawyer in representing a client who has an intellectual disability is to really analyze the relationship between the disability and the justice issues. So, for example, a very common legal question is whether the individual consented or whether the individual was competent. And questions about the individual's liberty, equality, life, property, all of those legal issues for a client who has an intellectual disability can be affected by the intellectual disability. So, in my opinion, excellent representation of a person with an intellectual disability demands that the lawyer understand the definition of intellectual disability, including the intellectual functioning part of that, the adaptive behavior part of that, and the fact that it's manifested before the age of 18, as well as the critically important 5 assumptions. These assumptions are essential to the application of the definition, and they are, I would say, essential to a lawyer's representation of a client with an intellectual disability. The definition manual can help the lawyer avoid incorrect stereotypes and prejudices. The definition manual can help the lawyer analyze the relationship between aspects of the disability and the legal principles that are involved in the case, such as competence or consent or liberty. And finally, the use of the definition manual can help the lawyer avoid devaluation of the client, can help to fight any inclinations to assume wrongly that the individual with intellectual disability is not valued by society or is not important, or that what happens to them doesn't matter. For justice and fairness, it's critical that the person's intellectual disability be understood. One of the challenging groups of people who have intellectual disability are the individuals with intellectual disability who have higher IQs. That is, the approximately 90%, 85 to 90% of all people with intellectual disability whose IQs are between about 55 and 75. This group of people with higher IQs doesn't typically have the physical markers or the physical indicators that would alert someone to the fact that they have an intellectual disability. In the 11th edition, the new manual, individuals with intellectual disability who have higher IQs are described in detail for the first time. This is a new section to the manual. And in addition to describing the current state of challenges for people with ID with higher IQs, there are also recommendations about how they can be supported and assisted. And as with all people with ID, one of the keys is a thorough diagnosis and a real analysis of the individual's functioning according to the guidelines of AAIDD. In addition, this is an area in which the choice of classification system becomes, I think, especially critical. To use a classification system that looks at their needs for supports in their ordinary lives will be a huge help to really serving these individuals. On the other hand, using an older classification system that classifies by IQ, such as referring to them as being mildly intellectually disabled, I think is not useful, because the classification system that incorporates mild does not adequately capture the disability of these individuals. Clinical judgment, as AAIDD defines it, is a special type of judgment rooted in a high level of expertise in intellectual disability and experience with people who have intellectual disabilities. We say that it emerges from extensive data, that there has to be substantial exploration before clinical judgment is used. According to AAIDD, clinical judgment is systematic, it's formal, and it's transparent. That means that it's used in a logical way, in a way that can be described clearly, and in a way that other people can thoroughly understand how the clinician arrived at this judgment. Clinical judgment uses several important strategies, and the strategies include clearly stating the question, conducting a thorough social history of the individual, conducting a broad assessment, and then synthesizing all of this information into a recommendation. Finally, clinical judgment, as I said, is important in diagnosis, classification, and planning supports. And what it does is it really enhances the quality and the validity of a recommendation, and the precision It enhances the quality, precision, and validity of a recommendation.